I am Chloe, 31 years old. 3 weeks ago, I found out my own brother stole my identity to take out a $623,000 mortgage on a luxury home. While I was pulling a double shift at the pediatric ward trying to save kids' lives, my parents looked me dead in the eye and said, "He just borrowed your name, Chloe. Stop being so dramatic." They actually laughed at my panic in front of our entire extended family at his lavish housewarming party. But there is one thing they didn't know. I had a fully certified police report in my purse and a financial crimes detective tracking their every move. And right now, they are begging me not to send him to federal prison. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my golden brother's perfect life, please hit that like button if you believe in justice. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Now, let's go back to the moment everything shattered. The dining room table was a massive slab of reclaimed walnut. It was the kind of furniture piece that required special delivery and cost easily more than the entire Kelly Blue book value of my 10-year-old car. It sat anchored underneath a cascading crystal chandelier that threw fractured, prism-like light across the faces of my family. My mother, Beatrice, was expertly pouring a $200 bottle of Cabernet into oversized crystal goblets. My father, Arthur, was leaning back in his custom-upholstered chair, laughing uproariously at a joke my brother Julian had just made about his golf handicap. Julian sat at the head of the table. He looked like he had stepped directly out of a high-end luxury lifestyle magazine. He was wearing a tailored navy blazer, a crisp white shirt unbuttoned perfectly at the collar, and a watch that caught the chandelier light every time he gestured. Next to him was his wife, Vanessa. Her wrists were heavy with stacked gold bracelets. She was smiling her picture-perfect, perfectly white smile, looking at her husband with an expression of absolute, manufactured adoration. They were celebrating. They were toasting to Julian's massive success in the competitive world of commercial real estate. They were drinking to his incredible business acumen, to his unmatched drive, and most importantly, to this stunning new mansion in the exclusive Highland Drive neighborhood. It was the quintessential American dream, wrapped in a bow and handed to the son who could do no wrong. I sat at the far end of the table, as physically far away from Julian as the seating arrangement would allow. My hands were resting in my lap, hidden beneath the crisp white linen tablecloth. My knuckles were completely white from gripping the fabric of my dress. Underneath the table, resting heavily on my knees, was a thick manila folder. It felt heavier than a block of concrete. I watched them pass the roasted asparagus glistening with imported olive oil. I watched them serve the garlic mashed potatoes and the I listened to my father brag endlessly about how Julian was securing the family inheritance. He went on and on about how Julian was a shining example of hard work, how he was building a legacy that would ensure none of them would ever have to worry about a thing. My mother nodded along, her eyes shining with pride, adding comments about how Vanessa had flawlessly decorated the sunroom. I waited for the perfect moment. I needed the timing to be absolutely flawless. I waited until the main course was fully served, until everyone had a full plate and a full glass, and until my mother raised her goblet for another grand toast. To Julian and Vanessa, my mother beamed, her voice carrying through the cavernous dining room. For showing us all what it means to truly succeed, and for giving us this beautiful space to gather as a family. Glasses clinked. Laughter rippled around the room. I did not raise my glass. I did not smile. I placed my hands flat on the top of the table. Slowly, deliberately, I brought the thick manila folder up from my lap and set it down right next to my untouched plate of steak. The heavy thud it made against the solid walnut wood was surprisingly loud. It cut through the clinking of crystal and the cheerful chatter like a gunshot. The conversation faltered for a second. My father frowned, annoyed by the interruption. Julian just shot me a condescending smirk, the kind of look he had been giving me since we were children. "What's that, Chloe?" Julian asked. His tone dripped with the usual patronizing warmth he reserved specifically for me. "Did you bring us some hospital pamphlets? Or maybe coupons for a garden center?" I looked right into his eyes. I did not blink. I did not shift my weight. I did not raise my voice, but I spoke with a clarity and coldness that I had never used in my entire life. "No, Julian," I said. My voice cut through the warm air of the dining room like a surgical scalpel. "It is a police report. For identity theft, mortgage fraud, and wire fraud." I pushed the folder across the smooth, polished surface of the table. It slid effortlessly, stopping right in front of his imported Italian dinner plate. The smile on his face did not completely vanish right away. It just froze, turning into a rigid, unnatural mask. The silence in the room became absolute and suffocating. You could hear the hum of the central air conditioning blowing through the vents. You could hear Vanessa's sudden, sharp intake of breath. My mother lowered her wine glass, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. "Chloe, what kind of joke is this? This is highly inappropriate for a celebration." "It is not a joke, Mom," I replied, keeping my eyes completely locked on my brother's pale face. "It turns out the $623,000 mortgage on this beautiful house we are sitting in right now is under my name. A name I never signed." The color completely drained from Julian's face. He looked like a man who had just been told his parachute had failed. But to understand exactly how I got to this dining room table, holding the detonator to my family's entire fake existence, I have to take you back to 3 weeks ago. Because before this dinner, I was just the invisible sister living in the shadows, accepting the scraps of affection my parents threw my way. I thought my life was perfectly fine. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. Growing up, there was always a rigid, unspoken hierarchy in the Wilson household. Julian was the bright, burning sun, and I was just a minor, insignificant planet lucky enough to orbit his brilliance. Julian was 3 years older, the firstborn son, and naturally charismatic. He was the varsity quarterback, the high school prom king, the kid who could talk his way out of a speeding ticket with a confident grin and a firm handshake. I was the quiet girl who liked biology, kept my head down, and spent my weekends reading or volunteering at the local animal shelter. When it came time for college, the disparity in how we were treated became impossible to ignore. My parents happily emptied the entire college fund they had saved for years to send Julian to a prestigious, ridiculously expensive out-of-state private university. He majored in something vague like business communications, which basically meant partying for 4 years and networking at fraternity houses. When my turn came to apply for school, my father sat me down at the kitchen table, patted my hand with a look of faux sympathy, and told me that character is built through financial struggle. He said they had no money left. I took out massive, high-interest student loans and commuted 45 minutes each way to the local state nursing program. I never complained. I never threw a tantrum. I loved the idea of being a nurse. After graduating, I got a job at Seattle Grace Hospital in the pediatric ward. My salary was modest. It certainly wasn't buying me Rolex watches or designer bags, but it paid for my cozy, safe one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. I filled my space with potted plants, thrifted furniture, and a rescue cat. I found a deep, abiding peace in my independence. Meanwhile, Julian bounced from one disastrous business venture to another. He always had a grand scheme, a new tech startup, a guaranteed investment that was going to make him a millionaire by 30. Every single time he failed, my parents bailed him out. They dipped into their retirement savings. They took out second mortgages. They enabled his delusions of grandeur because admitting he was a failure meant admitting their golden child was flawed. When Julian married Vanessa, the toxic dynamic only amplified. Vanessa was cut exactly from the same cloth as my brother. She demanded a certain lavish lifestyle. "Look at your brother, Chloe," Aunt Clara had whispered, sipping her expensive sherry. "He is really building a legacy. Have you thought about going back to school? Maybe becoming a doctor? A nurse's salary is fine, dear, but it won't build an inheritance for your future children. Look at how well Vanessa manages their portfolio." I just swallowed my pride, nodded politely, and walked away. I was completely used to it. I accepted my role as the disappointing, single, unambitious daughter. Then came the Tuesday morning that blew my reality to pieces. It was mid-morning at the hospital. The air smelled of sharp antiseptic, fresh laundry, and industrial floor cleaner. I was in room 412, carefully and gently changing the bandages on a 7-year-old boy named Tyler who had just had his appendix removed. He was a brave, sweet kid, quietly coloring in a superhero book while I worked. My cell phone vibrated sharply in my scrub pocket. Normally, I never answer personal calls on the floor. It is against protocol. But I was waiting for the results of an important biopsy for an elderly neighbor I helped care for on my days off. I finished taping Tyler's bandage, gave him a superhero sticker for being so tough, and stepped out into the busy, brightly lit hallway. I pulled out my phone, saw an unfamiliar corporate number, and answered. "Hello, this is Chloe Wilson," I said, keeping my voice low as a heavy medicine cart rattled past me. "Good morning, Ms. Wilson. This is Mr. Sterling from Washington Mutual Bank," a stern, highly professional voice said on the other end. "I am calling regarding your mortgage account ending in 4421. You are currently 3 months past due, and we are preparing to send the account to our pre-foreclosure legal department." I leaned my back against the cool cinder block wall, rubbing my forehead, genuinely amused by the scam call. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, you definitely have the wrong person. I rent my apartment. I don't own any real estate whatsoever, and I absolutely do not have a mortgage." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. The rapid clicking of a computer keyboard echoed through the receiver. "Ms. Wilson, I am looking at the official file right now. The property is located at 4872 Highland Drive. The loan originated 8 months ago in the exact amount of $623,000. We have your social security number, your employment verification from Seattle Grace Hospital, and your certified electronic signatures on all closing documents." The hallway around me suddenly seemed to tilt sideways. The ambient noise of the busy hospital, the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors, the overhead paging system, the chatter of doctors and nurses faded into a dull, rushing underwater roar in my ears. Highland Drive. That was Julian and Vanessa's new house. The massive dream house they had just invited the whole family to see. "That is my brother's house," I whispered, my voice trembling so hard I could barely form the words. "I didn't sign anything. I didn't buy that house." Mr. Sterling's tone shifted instantly from aggressive collections mode to genuine, serious concern. "Ms. Wilson, if you did not authorize this loan, you need to come down to the main branch immediately. Bring your government-issued ID and any proof of residency you have." I do not remember how I finished my shift. I operated on pure, blind autopilot. When I walked into the massive glass and steel lobby of Washington Mutual that afternoon, I felt like I was walking toward a firing squad. Mr. Sterling, a tall man in a sharp gray suit, led me into a private office with heavy oak doors. He placed a massive, thick file folder on his desk. He opened it and turned the crisp documents toward me. There it was. My name printed clearly at the top. My social security number. My exact workplace and employee ID number. But the salary listed on the application was completely fabricated, nearly $200,000 a year. And the signatures at the bottom of the pages were perfect, intricate looping forgeries of my handwriting. Who submitted this? I asked, my stomach violently twisting in knots. It was processed entirely online through an external real estate broker, Mr. Sterling explained, his face grim and serious. The down payment came from an account held by a Julian Wilson. Since you are listed as the primary borrower, the deed is technically in your name, but the massive debt rests solely on your shoulders. I sat in the heavy leather chair, staring blankly at the forged ink. My own brother. He had not just borrowed money from our parents again. He had chained me to a mountain of debt I could never repay in 3 lifetimes. "You need to pull a full credit report immediately," Mr. Sterling advised gently, pushing a notepad toward me. "If they compromised your identity for a mortgage, they likely did not stop there." I stumbled out of the bank and sat in my beat-up Honda Civic in the dark parking garage. The air inside the car was stifling, but my entire body was violently shivering. I pulled out my phone and requested a comprehensive credit report from Equifax. It took 3 agonizing minutes to generate. When the PDF finally loaded on my screen, I actually threw up a little bit of stomach acid into my mouth. The $600,000 mortgage was just the crown jewel of his betrayal. Below, it was a home equity line of credit maxed out at $150,000. There were 3 platinum credit cards with combined balances of $80,000. There was a personal loan for $45,000. My credit score, which I had carefully, painstakingly built to a pristine 780 over a decade of frugal living, was completely destroyed. It sat in the low 500s. I was drowning in nearly $1 million of fraudulent debt. I couldn't rent a new apartment if I tried. I couldn't buy a reliable car. If the hospital ran a routine financial background check, I could even lose my job. Julian and Vanessa had not just stolen my credit. They had utterly destroyed my future. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. I thought about the sheer audacity of it. The unbelievable cruelty. But the worst part was yet to come. Because when I started digging into how they pulled it off, I found a darkness so deep it terrified me to my core. The next morning, I called out sick from work. It was the first sick day I had taken in 4 years. I didn't cry. Crying was for people who still had hope that things were just a terrible misunderstanding. I was completely past hope. I was in a state of cold, clinical, terrifying hyperfocus. I needed to know exactly what I was up against before I struck back at them. I knew Julian and Vanessa drove 2 ridiculous, flashy cars, a matte black Porsche Cayenne and a bright yellow Lamborghini Huracan. They constantly bragged about them on Instagram, tagging the high-end exotic car dealership in downtown Seattle, acting as if they were royalty. I dressed in professional business casual clothes, put on large dark sunglasses, and drove straight to that exact dealership. The massive showroom floor smelled of expensive floor wax, fresh Italian leather, and exorbitant wealth. I approached a young salesman with slicked-back hair whose name tag read Leo. I gave him my warmest, most naive, starstruck smile. "Hi, Leo," I said, projecting a bubbly enthusiasm I did not feel. "I'm looking to buy a car for my husband as a surprise anniversary gift. My brother actually bought 2 cars from you a few months ago, Julian Parker. He highly recommended you and your service." Leo's face lit up with immediate recognition. "Oh, Julian. Of course. Yeah, the Cayenne and the Huracan. Great guy. We loved doing business with him and his wife." "Yeah, he's doing so well," I lied smoothly, keeping my voice bright. "I was actually wondering what kind of financing options you guys offer. Julian mentioned he got a great rate through your bank." Leo chuckled, shaking his head knowingly. "Actually, your brother is a cash buyer. Strictly wire transfers. We tried to run his credit for the Porsche initially to get him a promotional rate, but..." Leo leaned in, lowering his voice, acting like he was sharing a juicy industry secret with a friend. "Between you and me, his credit profile was a complete disaster. Massive defaults. A previous lawsuit from a vendor. The system auto-rejected him in seconds. But hey, cash is king, right? He wired the full funds the next day." I kept the bright smile plastered firmly on my face. "Cash is definitely king. Thanks, Leo. I'll be back with my husband to look around." I walked out of the dealership and let the heavy glass doors close behind me. Cash. They bought $500,000 worth of cars in hard cash, while completely ignoring the mortgage payments they had illegally taken out in my name. They were deliberately liquidating the fraudulent credit lines, hoarding the cash for themselves to buy toys, and letting my name take the catastrophic hit for the defaults. As I walked back to my car, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Aunt Clara's name. I took a deep, steadying breath and answered. "Chloe, darling." Aunt Clara's voice boomed through the speaker, vibrating with her usual aggressive cheerfulness and thinly veiled judgment. "I'm finalizing the guest list for the family reunion next month. I just spoke to Julian. He is so incredibly generous, Chloe. He offered to cater the entire..." "Did he?" I said, my voice dangerously flat. "Oh, He's doing magnificently, she continued, completely oblivious to my tone. You know, your father is so proud. With Julian securing the real estate portfolio, the family's legacy is safe. Have you managed to put anything into a retirement fund yet, dear? You really shouldn't be living paycheck to paycheck at your age. You should ask Vanessa for financial advice. She is brilliant with money. Vanessa. Brilliant with money. The irony tasted like old pennies and blood in my mouth. I'll keep that in mind, Aunt Clara, I said, and hung up the phone. That was the exact moment the last microscopic shred of familial loyalty died inside me. They weren't just using me, they were actively mocking my financial status to our relatives while secretly feasting on my stolen identity. They were laughing at my poverty while stealing my credit to buy Lamborghinis. I didn't drive home. I drove straight to the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. The precinct was a stark, depressing contrast to the luxury car dealership. It smelled of stale coffee, damp wool uniforms, and harsh floor disinfectant. The lighting was brutal fluorescent. I sat in a hard plastic chair in a crowded waiting room for 2 hours before I was finally called back to the desk of Detective Miller. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I sat down and handed her the massive binder I had painstakingly compiled the night before. It contained the credit reports, the forged mortgage documents from Mr. Sterling, the printouts of Julian and Vanessa's Instagram pages flaunting their impossible wealth. My brother and his wife stole my identity, I said simply, staring straight at her. They took out over $800,000 in fraudulent loans and mortgages. I want to press full criminal charges. I want them arrested. Detective Miller opened the binder. She spent 20 agonizing minutes reading through the documents in complete silence. The only sound was the flipping of pages and the distant ringing of precinct telephones. When she finally looked up, her expression had softened, but her eyes were cold with professional, focused anger. Ms. Wilson, she said quietly, I see a lot of family fraud in this department. Usually, it's a kid stealing a parent's credit card or an uncle opening a small loan. This is a highly coordinated, large-scale financial assassination. Can you prove it was them? I asked, my voice tight. The signatures are forged, but they used my real employee ID and social security number. Their lawyer will just claim someone else hacked my data and did it. They used an electronic portal for the mortgage application, Miller said, tapping a specific page with her pen. Every digital footprint leaves a trail. I am going to subpoena the ISP logs for the exact dates and times these applications were submitted. We will find out exactly which router these came from. I left the precinct feeling a strange, intoxicating mixture of terror and immense power. I had lit the fuse. 2 days later, Detective Miller called me. I was sitting on my small sofa, watering a fern, trying to pretend the world wasn't ending. Chloe, she said, her voice tight and urgent. We got the ISP logs back from the internet service provider. And my heart pounded frantically against my ribs. The IP address traces back directly to Julian and Vanessa's previous luxury condo, the one they rented right before buying the Highland Drive house. The applications were submitted from their personal network. But that's not the worst part. I stopped watering the plant. Water spilled onto the floor. What could possibly be worse than a fraudulent mortgage? I could hear Miller flipping through papers on her desk. We got a warrant for their search history on the devices connected to that router around the time the loans were finalized. Chloe, they were doing extensive research on bankruptcy laws. Bankruptcy? I echoed, genuinely confused. They weren't researching it for themselves, Miller explained slowly, making sure I understood the absolute gravity of the betrayal. They were researching how to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy under a stolen identity. Specifically, they searched, can you file bankruptcy for a sibling with power of attorney, and how to discharge mortgage debt in someone else's name. The phone nearly slipped from my sweaty palm. The sheer, calculating, sociopathic evil of it hit me like a physical punch to the gut. This wasn't just a case of them falling behind on bills and taking out a desperate loan. This was a premeditated execution of my life. Their plan was to buy the house, extract as much cash as possible through equity lines and credit cards, hide the cash in offshore or untraceable accounts, and then file for bankruptcy in my name. They would keep their cars, their cash, and their lifestyle. The bank would foreclose on the house in my name, and my financial record would be annihilated for the rest of my adult life. I would be left carrying the radioactive fallout while they rode off into the sunset. They were willing to completely destroy my ability to survive just so they could keep playing rich. "Are you still there, Chloe?" Miller asked gently. "I'm here," I whispered, wiping a single, angry tear from my cheek. "We are building the arrest warrants right now. It takes a little time to get the federal prosecutor on board for wire fraud across state lines. I need you to act completely normal. Do not confront them. Do not tip them off. Do not let them know we are watching. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "We have a family dinner this Saturday at their new house. I'll be there." I hung up the phone. The sadness was completely gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was a freezing, unbreakable resolve. They wanted to destroy my life? I was going to burn theirs to the ground, and I was going to do it right in front of the parents who created this monster. Saturday arrived. The day of the family dinner at the Highland Drive mansion. The day of reckoning. My best friend and fellow nurse, Maya, came over to my apartment that afternoon. She was the only person besides the police who knew the horrifying truth. When I had shown her the credit report a few days earlier, she had actually thrown her coffee mug against my kitchen wall in a fit of rage on my behalf. Maya was fiercely protective, a girl from Brooklyn who didn't take nonsense from anyone, and she despised my family's treatment of me. She stood behind me as I sat at my small vanity mirror, pulling my hair back into a sleek, severe, uncompromising bun. "You really don't have to do this, you know," Maya said softly, her hands resting reassuringly on my shoulders. "You can just let the police kick their door down on a Tuesday morning while they're drinking their overpriced matcha lattes. You don't have to sit at a table with these psychopaths and subject yourself to their garbage." I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were dark, completely devoid of the soft, accommodating, people-pleasing warmth I usually projected to the world. "Yes, I do," I replied, applying a shade of dark red lipstick I almost never wore. "For 31 years, my parents have treated Julian like a golden god and me like a peasant allowed to eat the scraps. If the cops just arrest him out of nowhere, my parents will immediately spin it. They'll hire an expensive defense lawyer. They'll blame the legal system. They'll say Julian was framed by a jealous business partner." Maya nodded slowly, understanding the deep necessity of this confrontation. She reached into my closet and pulled out a tailored, charcoal gray blazer I usually saved for intimidating hospital administration interviews. It looked like armor. "All right then," Maya said, handing me the jacket. "Go to war, Chloe." I meticulously packed the manila folder. It contained copies of everything: the forged mortgage documents, the devastating credit reports, the ISP logs proving the applications came from their router, and the official, stamped police report bearing Detective Miller's signature. I slid it carefully into my oversized leather tote bag. The drive to the Highland Drive neighborhood took exactly 30 minutes. With every mile, the streets grew wider, the trees older, the lawns more perfectly manicured. I turned onto their pristine street and saw the massive, craftsman-style mansion sitting aggressively on a hill overlooking the Puget Sound. Parked arrogantly in the sprawling circular driveway was Julian's matte black Porsche and Vanessa's obnoxious yellow Lamborghini. I pulled my 10-year-old Honda Civic right between them. I wanted the stark visual contrast to be the first thing anyone saw. I walked up the sweeping stone pathway. The front doors were massive, custom-carved mahogany, intimidating and grand. Before I even reached out to ring the bell, I could hear the loud, booming, confident laughter of my father from inside the house. I took one final, deep breath, locking my emotions into a steel vault deep in my chest. I pressed the illuminated doorbell. My mother opened the door. She was wearing a soft cashmere sweater and a string of pearls, holding a delicate glass of white wine. "Chloe," You made it, she chirped, leaning in to kiss the air near my cheek to avoid smudging her expensive makeup. We were starting to think you were working another one of those depressing weekend shifts at the hospital. No, Mom. I made sure to clear my schedule for tonight. I wouldn't miss this, I said smoothly, stepping past her into the massive foyer. The house was absurdly opulent. Vaulted ceilings with exposed wooden beams, massive abstract paintings that looked like they belonged in a gallery, a sweeping staircase leading to the second floor. It was a monument to theft. My theft. Every brick, every light bulb, every piece of art was bought with my stolen name. I walked into the sprawling living room. My father was sitting on a pristine white leather sofa, holding court with Julian. "There's my little girl," Dad said, not bothering to get up to greet me. Julian was just telling me about his new commercial real estate venture. "He's really crushing it this quarter, Chloe. You should sit down and take notes." "I am definitely taking notes, Dad," I smiled, a tight, cold smile. Julian stood up, holding a heavy crystal glass of amber bourbon. He looked so incredibly relaxed, so completely confident. It was the sickening arrogance of a man who truly believed he was untouchable. "Glad you could make it, sis. Can I get you a drink?" "We have a fantastic vintage from Napa." "Ice water is fine, Julian," I said, setting my heavy tote bag down on a chair. As he turned his back to walk to the wet bar, Vanessa walked into the room from the gourmet kitchen. She was wearing a slinky silk slip dress, carrying a heavy silver tray of artisanal cheeses and imported crackers. But unlike Julian, Vanessa did not look relaxed. As a trained nurse, I am educated to notice microexpressions and physiological responses to stress. Vanessa's pupils were slightly dilated. The tendons in her neck were tight and prominent. When she set the heavy cheese tray down on the glass coffee table, the silver tray rattled slightly against the surface. Her hands were visibly shaking. She looked up at me, and for a fraction of a second, her fake, welcoming smile dropped completely. Her eyes darted anxiously to my oversized leather tote bag, then back to my face, then back to the bag. She knew. I didn't know exactly how she knew, or what specifically she suspected, but Vanessa was terrified. While Julian was drowning in his own narcissism, completely blind to the steel trap closing around him, Vanessa's primal survival instincts were screaming at her. She quickly picked up her wine glass and took a massive, unladylike gulp, her eyes never leaving me. "Dinner is almost ready," Vanessa said, her voice slightly higher-pitched and tighter than usual. "Let's all move to the dining room before the food gets cold." We filed into the dining room. The crystal chandelier glittered ominously overhead. The trap was set. The audience was seated. The actors were in their places. I sat at the far end of the table, placing my heavy tote bag on the floor right next to my feet, keeping it within arm's reach. I watched them pass the expensive food. I listened to the endless stream of self-congratulatory garbage pouring out of my brother's mouth regarding his fake promotions and fake wealth. I felt the adrenaline pumping through my veins, cold, pure, and absolutely deadly. And as my mother raised her glass to toast to Julian's brilliant success, I reached down into my bag, my fingers wrapping tightly around the thick, heavy paper of the police report. The storm was finally here. The silence in the dining room was so absolute and so heavy that I could hear the faint, rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock out in the grand hallway. My mother's hand hovered completely frozen in midair. Her crystal wine glass was suspended exactly halfway to her mouth, the dark red Cabernet catching the light from the cascading chandelier. My father's booming, arrogant laughter had been abruptly severed. It was replaced by a deep, dark scowl of pure, unadulterated irritation. He looked at me not like a daughter who had just revealed a catastrophic, life-altering crime, but like a minor nuisance who had rudely interrupted his favorite television program. Julian, sitting at the head of the reclaimed walnut table in his tailored navy blazer, stared at the thick manila folder as if it were alive, ticking grenade. I did not break eye contact with my brother. I wanted him to feel the full weight of my presence. I wanted him to understand that the quiet, compliant sister he had exploited was dead and gone. I am going to say this exactly one time, I said. My voice was incredibly steady, utterly devoid of any of the nervous, people-pleasing trembling that used to define every single interaction I had with my family. I went to Washington Mutual Bank. I sat in Mr. Sterling's office. I looked at the finalized mortgage application for this exact property on Highland Drive. $623,000. It has my legal name, my social security number, and my employment verification from Seattle Grace Hospital. But the income stated on the application is completely fabricated, and the electronic signatures on every single page are forged. Julian blinked rapidly. The color was slowly returning to his face as his deeply ingrained narcissistic defense mechanisms kicked into high gear. He let out a short, breathy chuckle that sounded incredibly forced and unnatural. He looked at my parents, shaking his head with a dismissive, patronizing smirk plastered across his face. "Mom, Dad, please listen to her," Julian said. His tone was dripping with heavy condescension, the kind of voice one might use to soothe a hysterical child. "She has finally lost her mind. Chloe, I know you have always been a little jealous of my real estate success and my lifestyle, but making up a wild delusion about my house? Claiming I stole your identity? This is a completely new low, even for you. You really need professional help." "Jealous," I repeated. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my hands perfectly flat and still on the walnut table. "You actually think I am jealous of a house spot with a stolen identity? You think I am jealous of a man who is so incredibly financially incompetent, so completely bankrupt in every sense of the word, that he had to steal his little sister's pristine credit score just to pretend he is wealthy?" My father slammed his heavy fist onto the table. The crystal wine glasses rattled violently, the expensive silverware clinking against the imported Italian dinner plates. "Enough," my father bellowed. His face was turning a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. "Chloe, you will absolutely not come into your brother's home, sit at his table, eat his food, and accuse him of a federal crime. Do you have any idea how hard Julian has worked for this promotion? Do you know the kind of extreme pressure he is under in the commercial real estate market? If this is your idea of a sick, twisted joke because you are bitter about your small nurse's salary, you can get up and leave right now. I will not tolerate this disrespect." I didn't move a single muscle. I didn't flinch. For the first time in my 31 years on this earth, my father's booming anger did not make me shrink into myself. It did not make me want to apologize. It just made me realize how utterly pathetic and blind his devotion truly was. He was willing to protect his son's illusion at the cost of my actual reality. "I am not leaving, Dad," I said coldly. "And I am not making anything up. I brought the receipts." I reached out and flipped the heavy cover of the manila folder open. I pulled out the first stack of printed documents. It was the comprehensive Equifax credit report. I slid it right to the center of the table, pushing it past the platter of roasted asparagus and the bowl of garlic mashed potatoes. "It was not just the massive mortgage," I continued, making sure my voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. "Take a good look at page 3. There is a home equity line of credit taken out for $150,000. There are 3 separate platinum credit cards completely maxed out to a combined $80,000. There is an unsecured personal loan for $45,000. My credit score, which I spent a decade meticulously building to a 780, is entirely destroyed. It is in the low 500s. I am nearly $1 million in fraudulent debt because of your golden boy." My mother finally set her wine glass down on the table. Her manicured hands were shaking violently. She looked at the stark black and white numbers on the Equifax report, then looked up at Julian. "Julian? Honey, what is she talking about?" my mother asked, her voice wavering with the first signs of genuine panic. "Tell her she is confused. Tell her this is just a terrible misunderstanding." Julian's eyes darted frantically around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. He tugged roughly at the crisp collar of his expensive shirt as if it were suddenly choking the life out of him. "It is a mistake, Mom," Julian stammered. His smooth, charismatic facade was showing massive, irreparable cracks. "It has to be a bank error. Or identity theft." "Yes," Someone must have hacked her data from the hospital servers. You know how notoriously insecure those medical databases are. Someone stole her identity, took out the loans, and somehow routed the funds to frame me. Oh, a mysterious hacker? I asked, raising a single eyebrow. I reached into the folder again and pulled out the thick stack of ISP subpoena logs provided by Detective Miller. I slapped them down directly on top of the credit report. This is an official, court-ordered subpoena returned from the internet service provider, I said, tapping the heavy paper with my index finger. The police cyber crimes unit traced the exact IP address used to submit the electronic mortgage application, as well as the applications for every single credit card. Do you want to know where the digital signal came from, Julian? Julian swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. It came from your luxury condo, I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The exact condo you and Vanessa rented right before you moved into this house. Every single fraudulent document was submitted from your personal, password-protected Wi-Fi network. The massive down payment for this house was wired directly from your personal checking account. Do you really expect a federal judge to believe a random hacker broke into your secure apartment, used your internet, hacked your bank account, and wired your money to buy a house in my name? The room fell into a horrifying, suffocating silence. My father's face went completely slack. The realization was finally hitting him like a runaway freight train. It was dismantling 30 years of carefully constructed, fiercely protected illusions about his brilliant son. My mother pressed both of her hands tightly over her mouth, stifling a sharp gasp. You wanted the police? Julian whispered. His voice was cracking, stripped of all its former bravado. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by raw, naked, animalistic panic. Of course I went to the police, I replied, staring at him with absolute, unadulterated disgust. Did you honestly think I was just going to sit back and let you ruin my life? Did you think I would just quietly absorb $1 million in toxic debt so you could keep driving your Porsche and your Lamborghini to your country club? Chloe, you don't understand how any of this works. Julian shouted, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. You don't understand how commercial real estate operates right now. The market took a massive, unexpected downturn. My primary investors backed out at the last minute. I had leveraged absolutely everything we owned. We were going to lose the rental condo, the cars, the memberships, everything. So you decided to steal my life to save yours, I stated plainly, offering zero sympathy. It was a bridge loan. Julian yelled, his face slick with nervous sweat. It was only supposed to be temporary. I just needed your clean credit profile to secure the primary asset. I was going to refinance the house entirely in my name as soon as my next big commission check cleared. I swear to God, Chloe, I was going to pay it all off. You were never supposed to find out about any of this. It was just a temporary financial fix to get us through a rough quarter. Temporary. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that held absolutely no humor. Do not insult my intelligence, Julian. Do not treat me like an idiot. I know exactly what your ultimate backup plan was. I reached into the folder one last time. I pulled out the final, most damning piece of paper. It was the search warrant return detailing their internet browsing history. The police pulled your exact search history from the days leading up to the final loan approvals. I read the document aloud, making sure every single word landed like a physical blow. How to file Chapter 7 bankruptcy under a stolen identity. Can you discharge mortgage debt for a sibling without their knowledge or consent? You never had any intention of paying me back a single dime. You were going to extract all the available equity in cash, hide it in offshore accounts, and then declare bankruptcy using my name. You were going to deliberately let the bank foreclose on this house and leave me with the absolute, smoking ruins of my financial life while you and Vanessa walked away completely clean. My mother burst into tears. It was a loud, ugly, gut-wrenching sobbing sound. Julian, tell me this isn't true, she wept, reaching her trembling hand out toward him across the table. Tell me you didn't do this to your own sister. Please tell me. Julian stopped his frantic pacing. He looked at my weeping mother, he looked at my stunned father, and then he looked at me. His handsome face contorted into an ugly, desperate, vicious sneer. He realized the charismatic golden boy act was completely dead and buried. He realized he could not charm his way out of federal wire fraud. And so, true to his cowardly nature, he immediately reverted to a cornered animal desperately looking for a scapegoat to take the fall. And he found the perfect scapegoat sitting right next to him. It wasn't my idea. Julian yelled at the top of his lungs, pointing a trembling, accusing finger across the table. He didn't point at me. He pointed directly at his wife. Vanessa, who had been sitting completely frozen in her chair, gripping the stem of her crystal wine glass like a lifeline, physically recoiled as if he had struck her across the face. Her perfectly manicured features twisted in absolute shock. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. I didn't do the technical stuff. Julian continued, his voice rising in a frantic, hysterical pitch. He was throwing his wife under the bus with absolutely zero hesitation to save his own skin. I don't know how to forge digital signatures on bank documents. I don't know how to spoof IP addresses or bypass multi-factor bank verification protocols. It was Vanessa. She is the one who handles all our portfolio administration. She used to work in corporate finance. She knew exactly how to exploit the automated underwriting systems at Washington Mutual. She set the whole damn thing up. Vanessa slammed her wine glass down onto the walnut table so hard the delicate crystal stem snapped in half. Dark red Cabernet spilled violently across the pristine white linen tablecloth. It looked exactly like fresh blood spreading from an open wound. You cowardly, pathetic piece of garbage, Vanessa hissed. Her voice was vibrating with a rage so deep and so venomous it actually made the hairs on my arms stand up. The polished, elegant, supportive society wife facade completely evaporated in a millisecond. What was left was a vicious, cornered, highly intelligent predator. Don't you dare try to pin this entirely on me, Julian, Vanessa snarled, standing up abruptly and leaning aggressively across the table toward him. Don't act like you were some innocent, naive bystander who got dragged into this. Who was the one crying like a baby on the bathroom floor of our rental condo because his prestigious country club membership was about to be publicly revoked for non-payment? Who was the one sobbing that he couldn't face his father if he had to admit his commercial real estate firm was going completely bankrupt? My father looked like he was going to have a massive heart attack right there in the dining room. He grabbed his chest, breathing heavily, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. Bankrupt, he whispered, his entire worldview collapsing in real time. What do you mean bankrupt? Yes, Arthur, bankrupt. Vanessa yelled, turning her venomous, furious gaze to my parents. Your perfect, genius, golden son is a complete and utter fraud. He hasn't closed a single legitimate commercial real estate deal in over 2 years. He lost all his major clients because he is lazy, entitled, and completely incompetent. But he refused to downgrade his lifestyle. He refused to sell the Porsche. He refused to give up the illusion of wealth because he was terrified of disappointing you. She turned back to me, her chest heaving with exertion, her eyes wild and blazing. Yes, Chloe, I did the technical work. I forged your signatures on the PDFs. I set up the dummy email accounts to intercept the bank verifications and the credit checks. Because your brother was too pathetic and too technologically incompetent to even commit fraud properly. But it was absolutely his idea to use you as the mark. He explicitly told me, Chloe never checks her credit score. She lives like a nun in that cheap little apartment with her plants. She won't notice a thing until we are already clear. He handed me your social security number and your hospital employee ID on a silver platter and begged me to save his life. The sheer, unadulterated brutality of her confession hung in the dining room, heavy, toxic, and suffocating. They were a match made in hell. A narcissistic, lazy coward and a ruthless, greedy enabler. They had built their entire luxury lifestyle on the bones of my financial security. And now that the harsh light of justice was shining directly on them, they were viciously tearing each other to pieces to save themselves. Both of you, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm, dead register, are going to federal prison. My mother practically threw herself across the table, knocking over a heavy porcelain plate of asparagus in the process. She reached out and grabbed my arm, her manicured fingernails digging painfully deep into my skin. "No, Chloe, please," my mother begged. Her expensive mascara was running down her cheeks in dark, ugly, jagged streaks. "You cannot send your own brother to prison. He made a terrible, terrible mistake. Vanessa manipulated him. You heard her, she did all the technical work. She tricked him. We will fix this. Your father and I will remortgage our house tomorrow morning. We will cash out our entire retirement fund. We will pay off the debt, every single penny of it, I swear to you. Just call the police and tell them it was a massive misunderstanding. Tell them you gave him verbal permission to use your name. Please, Chloe, he is your family." I stared down at my mother's tear-stained, desperate face. For over 3 decades, I had deeply craved her affection. I had wanted her to look at me with the same fierce, protective, unconditional love she reserved exclusively for Julian. I had spent my entire life trying to be the good daughter, the quiet daughter, the helpful daughter. And now she was finally begging me, finally giving me her full attention, but only to demand that I sacrifice myself one more time to save the son who had gleefully destroyed me. I slowly, deliberately reached over and pried her fingers off my arm, pulling them away one by one. "There is no misunderstanding, Mom," I said. My voice was completely hollowed out of any remaining daughterly affection. I felt nothing but cold, hard clarity. He didn't just borrow money. He committed identity theft, bank fraud, and wire fraud across state lines. He actively planned to declare bankruptcy in my name. He planned to ruin my entire life, my career, my future. And your very first instinct isn't to protect me, the actual victim in this room. Your first instinct is to ask me to lie to a federal investigator to save a criminal who hates me. "He is your brother," my father roared. He finally found his voice, though it was shaking violently with desperation and fear. "You do not send family to prison. We will handle this internally as a family. We will hire a top lawyer to settle the debt quietly. If you go through with this police report, you will destroy this family forever. You will be completely dead to us, Chloe. Do you understand me? Dead to us." I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had confidently told me I needed to build character through extreme financial struggle, while simultaneously handing my brother the entire world on a silver platter. "You are threatening to disown me for turning in the man who stole $1 million from me?" I asked. A bitter, utterly humorless smile touched the corners of my lips. "Dad, this family was completely destroyed the exact moment Julian typed my social security number into that loan application. I am not destroying anything today. I am just handing you the final bill." I zipped up my oversized leather tote bag, securing the evidence inside. I looked at Julian, who was completely silent, staring blankly at the spilled wine on the tablecloth, looking incredibly small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. I looked at Vanessa, who was glaring at me with pure, unadulterated, venomous hatred. Detective Miller already has the ISP logs, the forged documents, and the bank statements, I said to the room at large, ensuring everyone understood the finality of the situation. Wire fraud carries a mandatory minimum sentence in the federal system. The federal prosecutor is already reviewing the arrest warrants as we speak. You have maybe 48 hours before the government freezes every single asset you possess. I turned my back on my weeping parents. I turned my back on my broken brother. I turned my back on the glittering crystal chandelier and the reclaimed walnut table. I walked out of the massive mahogany front doors and stepped out into the driveway. I didn't look back. The cold night air hit my face, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely, terrifyingly, wonderfully free. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below, so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover the story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The fallout from that dinner was spectacular, incredibly swift, and utterly merciless. Exactly 3 days after that disastrous family confrontation, I was sitting in the hospital break room, sipping a lukewarm cup of terrible coffee, when my phone buzzed with a secure text message from Detective Miller. It contained just 2 words: warrants executed. I later found out the exact, humiliating details from a nosy neighbor who had gleefully filmed the entire ordeal on their cell phone from across the street. At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, 3 unmarked black SUVs aggressively pulled into the sprawling circular driveway of the Highland Drive mansion. Federal agents, wearing heavy tactical vests with FBI emblazoned on the back, did not bother ringing the doorbell politely. They forcefully breached the custom mahogany front doors with a battering ram. Julian and Vanessa were dragged out of their $600,000 stolen dream house in heavy steel handcuffs, wearing their expensive, matching silk pajamas. The agents didn't care about their elite country club status. They didn't care about their curated Instagram following. They were processed like the common, white-collar criminals they truly were. Furthermore, because the vehicles were purchased with cash directly funneled from the fraudulent credit lines they had opened in my name, asset forfeiture was immediately triggered by the government. 2 flatbed tow trucks arrived an hour later to repossess the matte black Porsche and the bright yellow Lamborghini right out of the driveway. The entire wealthy neighborhood watched in stunned silence as the golden couple's fake empire crumbled into absolute dust. Julian's high-priced, aggressive defense lawyer tried to call me a dozen times over the next few weeks. He left slick, highly manipulative voicemails talking about the paramount importance of family unity. He offered a private, out-of-court settlement and subtly threatened a protracted, exhausting legal battle that would drain my non-existent financial resources. I never answered a single call. I simply forwarded every single voicemail directly to the federal prosecutor handling the case as evidence of witness tampering. My parents, staying true to their toxic word, completely cut contact with me. They actually mortgaged their own modest home to pay for Julian's astronomical legal defense fees. But absolutely no amount of money could buy their way out of the meticulous digital paper trail Vanessa had so arrogantly left behind. 6 months later, a lengthy, public trial was entirely averted when the sheer volume of undeniable evidence finally broke them. Faced with the harsh reality of a massive trial and overwhelming proof of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy, both Julian and Vanessa officially accepted a plea deal. I sat in the cold, imposing, wood-paneled federal courtroom on the day of their formal sentencing. Julian looked like a hollowed-out shadow of his former self. He had lost a significant amount of weight, his hair was noticeably thinning, and he wore a drab, ill-fitting beige prison jumpsuit that completely swallowed his previously confident, broad-shouldered posture. Vanessa looked equally haggard. Her expensive highlights had grown out showing dark roots, and her hands trembled violently as she stood before the federal judge. The judge showed absolutely zero leniency for white-collar family fraud. Julian was sentenced to 48 months in a federal correctional facility, citing his role as the primary beneficiary and instigator of the extensive fraud. Vanessa received 36 months for executing the technical forgery and the conspiracy. They were jointly ordered to pay full, complete restitution to the banks, and a massive civil judgment was legally placed against any future earnings they might ever have. As they were being led out of the courtroom by the armed bailiffs, Julian turned his head and looked directly at me sitting in the gallery. There was absolutely no arrogance left in his eyes. There was only a hollow, terrifying, endless emptiness. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stared back at him with a blank expression until the heavy oak doors closed firmly behind him. But the final, most sickening, unexpected twist of the entire saga didn't come from Julian or Vanessa. It came a week later when I was reluctantly helping my Aunt Clara clear out some old, dusty family storage boxes in my parents' basement. My parents were aggressively ignoring me, but Clara had insisted she needed my help, likely to snoop on my emotional state and gather gossip. While moving a heavy cardboard box of old tax returns, a manila folder slipped out and spilled its contents onto the cold concrete floor. As I bent down to pick up the scattered papers, my eyes immediately caught Julian's name on a series of printed bank transfer receipts. They were from Aunt Clara's personal checking account, routing thousands of dollars directly into Julian's account over the past 3 years. My blood instantly ran cold. I started digging frantically through the folder, completely ignoring Clara calling my name from the top of the stairs. I found a printed email exchange between Julian and Clara dated exactly 2 months before the fraudulent mortgage was signed. Julian had written, "Aunt Clara, I am drowning. The business is completely going under. Vanessa is threatening a nasty divorce if we have to move into a smaller place. My credit is entirely shot. The bank is going to call in the commercial loans." Clara's reply, printed in stark black and white ink, made my stomach violently churn. "Julian, you must protect the family image at all costs. You absolutely cannot let your father see you fail. Your sister Chloe has pristine credit. She never uses it. She has no ambition to buy real estate on a nurse's salary anyway. You have always been the smart one. Figure out a way to use her profile as a co-signer without alarming her. It is for the greater good of the family legacy. I will wire you another $10,000 to cover the immediate broker fees to expedite the process." I sat on the cold basement floor, the piece of paper shaking uncontrollably in my hand. Aunt Clara, the woman who constantly lectured me at funerals about 401k plans and the importance of inheritance. The woman who endlessly praised Julian's brilliance. She wasn't just an annoying, gossipy relative. She was the one actively funding his delusions. She was the one who explicitly planted the seed to use my identity, rationalizing the crime because I was just a lowly nurse with no ambition. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream or throw a fit. I simply took my smartphone out of my pocket, photographed every single document, every transfer receipt, and every email. I put the papers back exactly as I found them, walked upstairs, looked Aunt Clara dead in the eye, and said, "I have an emergency at the hospital. I have to go." I immediately drove to my apartment and forwarded the high-resolution photos directly to Detective Miller and the federal prosecutor. While Clara narrowly avoided direct jail time because suggesting a crime isn't exactly the same as executing wire fraud under the legal statute, she was brought in by the FBI for intense, humiliating questioning. The massive stress of the federal investigation, combined with the IRS suddenly auditing her incredibly suspicious wire transfers, completely destroyed her pristine standing in the wealthy community. She became a total pariah, isolated in her large, empty house, terrified of the legal system she had so casually suggested my brother manipulate. The villains hadn't just fallen. They had actively dragged each other down into the abyss. The aftermath of surviving a massive financial trauma is incredibly tedious and profoundly exhausting. It is not like the movies where the bad guy goes to jail in handcuffs and the hero instantly gets their perfect life back the very next day. I spent the next year and a half deeply entangled in a frustrating, soul-crushing bureaucratic nightmare. I spent hundreds of hours on hold on the phone with Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I had to mail thick envelopes filled with certified copies of the police reports, the court transcripts, and the final sentencing documents to dozens of angry creditors. Mr. Sterling at Washington Mutual became a crucial, unexpected ally, personally advocating for the massive, fraudulent mortgage to be fully expunged from my permanent record. Slowly, agonizingly, my credit score began to climb out of its shallow grave. It moved from the dismal 500s back into the 600s, and eventually, after 2 full years of relentless, aggressive paperwork, it touched 750 again. The fraudulent debts were completely and legally wiped from my profile. The massive mansion on Highland Drive was officially foreclosed on and sold at a public bank auction for a fraction of its original value. My parents and I remained entirely and permanently estranged. They simply couldn't forgive me for sending their golden boy to federal prison, and I couldn't forgive them for demanding I sacrifice my entire life to cover up a felony. The boundary I set was absolute and impenetrable. I changed my phone number. I moved out of my apartment and didn't leave a forwarding address with any extended family members. In my 3rd year of complete freedom from my family, I got a significant, hard-earned promotion at Seattle Grace Hospital, moving up to the head charge nurse position of the pediatric ward. With my salary substantially increased and my credit fully restored, I walked into a small, reputable local credit union. I sat down with a friendly loan officer, presented my legitimate pay stubs, and applied for a mortgage. When I finally held the heavy black pen to sign the closing documents on a beautiful, modest two-bedroom craftsman home with a large garden in the backyard, my hand hovered over the paper. The last time my name was on a mortgage document, it had been forged by a traitor to steal a mansion. This time, I pressed the pen down firmly onto the paper. I signed my name with immense pride. I bought my own home with my own money earned through honest, grueling hard work. A few weeks after moving into my new house, while I was happily unpacking boxes in the kitchen, I received a thin letter forwarded from my old address. The return address printed in the corner was a federal correctional facility in California. It was from Julian. I sat down at my new granite kitchen island and opened the thin, cheap prison paper. The handwriting was neat, completely stripped of its usual flamboyant, arrogant flourishes. Chloe, the letter began. I have had 3 years in a 6x8 cell to think about what I did to you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me. I spent my whole life believing I was entitled to success, and when I failed, I was too much of a coward to admit it to Dad. Vanessa filed for divorce 6 months ago. Mom and Dad lost their house trying to pay my civil judgments. I ruined everyone who loved me. But what I did to you was the worst of all. You were always the best of us, Chloe. You built a real life, while I just built a house of cards on your back. I am truly, deeply sorry. I will never contact you again. I read the letter twice. I didn't feel a surge of anger. I didn't feel a rush of triumph. I just felt a profound, quiet, heavy sadness for the brother I never really had, and for the family that was destroyed by pride and greed long before the police ever got involved. I struck a match, held the corner of the letter to the open flame, and dropped it into my stainless steel sink. I watched it burn until it was nothing but gray, weightless ash, and then I washed it down the drain with cold water. I washed my hands, dried them on a fresh towel, and walked out into my sunlit backyard to tend to my garden. My life is incredibly beautiful now. It is quiet. It is safe. I am surrounded by friends who are my true chosen family, like Maya, who helped me paint my living room walls last weekend. I have a career I love, a home I own, and a future that belongs entirely to me. I learned the hardest lesson a person can possibly learn in this life. Toxic family members will use your loyalty as a weapon to destroy you. They will demand you set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. But you do not owe anyone your future, not even the people who share your blood. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It is essential for your survival. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect your own life from the people who were supposed to love you? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Thank you for listening. Keep protecting your peace.